Hi everyone, welcome to Selling to Healthcare. I'm Lisa Miller. I've spent over 30 years in healthcare sales, from building lasting partnerships to driving real results for hospitals and health systems. And I'm here to share what I've learned about leading with service and, how that can change the game for you no matter where you are in your career. Today, I want to talk about something that I think is really, really important. And honestly, it's something I really care about, which is your marketing asset strategy. And when most companies think about selling into hospitals, they jump straight to the sales stuff, right? Who's the decision maker? How do I get in front of the committee? What's my ROI story going to be? And look, those things are important, I think, but here's the truth. And I've seen this play out over and over again in my career. Marketing is the foundation of sales. I mean, I've seen entire contracts close because of a single powerful marketing asset, even something as simple as an email newsletter. And on the flip side, I've watched, excellent solutions fail because there was no marketing asset strategy in place. So too often, companies that have really great products and services will spend all this money on infrastructure, but then they just don't put nearly enough into the marketing assets that actually bring those solutions to market. And that imbalance is, really costly. And I mean, in many cases, it can quietly determine the difference between market traction and market failure. So I think marketing assets are really where you need to put your focus, because they're what educate the buyer, to show your value, and they're ultimately what's going to drive those sales forward. And marketing isn't a side activity, right? It's not just branding. It's the expression of your thinking and your point of view on why your solution exists, why it matters, and how it delivers measurable value. So let me tell you a story, and this is kind of a defining moment for me early on. So early on at VIE Healthcare, I was talking to a mentor, and he just stopped me and he said, "Lisa, you're hunting elephants with a BB gun." And at the time, I was closing deals with just a handful of marketing pieces, but there was no real strategy behind any of it, right? And that comment just stuck with me, and it really changed how I thought about everything. And the reality is that, too many companies approach going to market the same way today. They've got a sales deck, a website, maybe one marketing sales piece, and then, a hope that reps can fill in the gaps. But in healthcare, where decision cycles are long and stakeholders are, cautious, this approach costs you time, credibility, and revenue. So I think it's far more effective to invest upfront in a real solid marketing asset strategy, one that shortens sales cycles and helps close larger contracts. Either way, you're going to spend the money, right? You can invest early in building the right assets, or you can pay more for it later in, drawn out cycles and lost deals. So here's something I think is really important to understand about how hospitals actually buy. Hospitals don't buy demos, right? They buy clarity, confidence, and proof. And by the time they actually speak to your sales team, they're often, about 2/3 of the way through their decision process already. And so what's filling that gap for them is your marketing assets. They express your point of view. They educate buyers. They build trust. And, they advance sales. Without them, you're basically asking hospital executives to make, high stakes decisions with incomplete information. And I think that's a really, really hard position to put them in. So I created what I call the 789 marketing asset framework. And, it's basically 3 levels of marketing assets where every level builds on the one before it. 7 basics, which is the foundation every company must have. 8 advanced, which are the marketing assets that amplify your reach and credibility. And then 9 mastery, which are the marketing assets and strategies that separate market leaders. So let's start with the 7 basics. And these are, non-negotiable. Without them, you're invisible to buyers. First is your website, and, it needs to be buyer-centric, keyword-driven, and structured so people can actually find what they need. Second is sell sheets, and I'm talking about, two-sided resources that are tailored by role or by product. Third is, a company overview, like a brochure that really communicates who you are and what you stand for. Fourth is case studies, proof in action, where has this worked and how. Fifth is presentations, and you want, a short version and a long version that are really built to move the discussion forward. Sixth is your LinkedIn company page, which, needs to be a credible, updated hub for outreach. And seventh is a lead magnet, like a white paper or a checklist or a research brief, something that opens doors. And I really can't stress this enough, right? These 7 are the foundation. You don't have them, you're basically invisible to hospital buyers. So once the basics are in place, you can, start to expand your influence with the 8 advanced marketing assets. So you're looking at things like short webinars, 15 to 25 minutes, YouTube videos, ebooks, internal newsletters, follow-up materials after presentations, ROI frameworks, a LinkedIn newsletter, and then, what I call insight library, so research reports, special reports, that kind of thing. At this stage, you're not just explaining what you do anymore, you're actually shaping how the market thinks about the problem. And I think that shift is really, really important. And then, there's the 9 mastery level assets. And these aren't necessarily harder, but they are discipline driven, right? They require strong execution of the basics and the advanced layers first. So these include a podcast, sponsored webinars with industry associations, speaking engagements, virtual one-day events, private teaching sessions, in-person events, industry advertising, a book and direct mail campaigns. And mastery assets are, what elevate you from participant to market leader. And I think that distinction is really, really important. I want to go deeper now into 5 specific marketing assets that consistently make the difference when you're selling into hospitals. And I'm going to break down, what makes these 5 so powerful, how to build them with intention, and how they work together to accelerate sales. So let's start with the website. And there's a statistic that I think should shape how every company thinks about this. Hospital buyers are already, about 67% of the way through their research before they ever speak to a sales rep. That means your website isn't just a digital presence, right? It's, the most critical marketing asset you have. And it's often the difference between being invited into a buying process or being overlooked entirely. And what matters most, I think, is recognizing that hospital executives aren't searching for your product name, right? They're searching for answers to their problems, like purchase services, cost savings, reducing readmissions, improving discharge readiness. When I ran VIE healthcare, the phone would ring because someone had Googled purchase services or hospital cost savings, and they landed on our site, right? And that only happened because we took the time to figure out what they were actually searching for, and we wrote in their language, not ours. And of course, the first version of the site wasn't right. I mean, we had to revisit the structure, refine the navigation, and keep testing till it matched what buyers were truly looking for. And that's why, I think a website has to be built on really 3 things: structure, like making it easy to find information by role or by problem; strategy that reflects what your market is actually searching for. When it's done well, a hospital executive should walk away from your site thinking, we should call this company. So next up is sell sheets. And, I think a lot of people overlook these because they look simple, but I'm telling you, a well-built sales sheet can do a lot of heavy lifting for your sales team. And too often, companies hand out these one-sided sheets with like generic benefits that don't really connect to what matters most to executives. So a well-designed sales sheet has two sides, right? The front provides a clear role-specific snapshot of the value you deliver, and the back is where you add something interactive like an assessment or a checklist, or even, a short diagnostic that prompts the prospect to identify their own gaps. And I always create sales sheets with variations. So some are role-based, like a CFO version looks very different from a department leader's, right? Others are, case study-based or evidence-based or discussion-driven. And each one is designed to frame a conversation, not just, decorate a table at a conference. I never waste the back of the sheet. Someone once said to me, if you're already printing the page, why would you leave half of it blank? And I think that's so, so true. And distribution matters as much as design, right? I've used sales sheets as leave behinds and executive meetings. I've sent them, via FedEx to hospital CFOs, and I've attached them as part of follow-up after presentations. And when they're built with intent, they stop being background material and they become the thing that actually moves the conversation forward. So the third one is the ROI framework. And I think this is really important because hospitals make decisions slowly, because they're risk averse, and rightfully so. And that's why a well-built ROI framework is so much more than a calculator, right? It's a tool that actually reduces decision risk. So credible ROI model, it can't just be about the financial piece, right? Like, yes, spend reduction, revenue capture, that matters, but hospitals are also looking at, operational improvements, reducing risk, and then the clinical outcomes that tie back to things like reimbursement and penalties. And when you include all of these, you move beyond the narrow math and you show how your solution, touches how the hospital actually runs and performs. So I recommend building 3 versions of your ROI. The first is a workbook for the CFO, right, where they can adjust the assumptions and see what the conservative numbers look like. Then a 1-pager for executives that shows your inputs and the expected impact at 30 or 90 days. And then a simpler tool, for department managers so they can look at their own areas and find where the opportunities are. And this is something I learned, from running consulting projects for years. You've got to bring the finance team in early. Once the ROI model feels like something you built together, right? It's not just your numbers anymore. The whole thing changes. Now you're not pitching savings, you're helping them feel confident about the decision. So the fourth one is, what I call the research and insight library. And this is where, one report can be useful, but a consistent library of insights that creates real market pull. And over time at VI Healthcare, I built, an entire library of more than 20 types of reports. We were doing about 1 per quarter, and that really built our authority, and it just became this steady way that people were finding us. And the cadence matters, right? Quarterly executive reports and monthly insight briefs, they create a rhythm that keeps your perspective in front of buyers. Each piece of research should also be repurposed into, multiple assets, like a webinar, a short video, a LinkedIn post, or even a role-specific sales sheet. So every single research project becomes a whole suite of marketing assets. And the library also powers your follow-up strategy, right? So, after a presentation, I rarely just send a thank you email. Instead, I send reinforcements. So in the first 24 hours, you're sending a role-specific sales sheet, a micro case, maybe a short checklist. By the end of the week, you go deeper, a research brief or an ROI summary. And then week 3, you invite them to a private teaching session. And that sequencing, that's what keeps things moving and builds real momentum. And I've lost count, of the number of times a CFO replied directly to one of these reports with just, please schedule a call. And I think that's the power of consistent insight-driven assets, right? They turn passive interest into active engagement. So the fifth one is case studies. And, hospitals don't buy promises, right? They buy proof. And I think case studies are still one of the most powerful things you can have, because at the end of the day, the hospital leader is thinking, has this worked somewhere else? And what do the results look like? And the best case studies, I think, follow a simple but really powerful format. You start with the situation as the hospital defined it. Then you describe, the language, not your product sheet. And you end with results that tie directly to their metrics, like cost savings, penalty avoidance, throughput gains, or patient safety improvements. And the timeline matters too, right? When you can show that you got results in 30, 90, or 180 days, the executive starts thinking, okay, I can actually see this working at my hospital. And, your case studies should come in different forms, right? The traditional one-pager is great, but you also want micro cases, maybe one slide or a 90-second video, and then comparative ones where you're showing why your approach got better results than the alternatives, and building a searchable case library by, service line and role just ensures your team always has the right proof for the right audience. Because hospitals are cautious and, really research driven by nature, and case studies help de-risk their decision and move them closer to action. So I think the bigger picture here, and I really, really want you to hear this, is that marketing isn't a transactional tool, right? It is a strategy. And the purpose of marketing assets is not to, pitch features, but to transfer ideas and insights and points of view. Done well, they show hospitals a better way to avoid problems and, errors and mistakes. They offer opportunities for improvement, but your solution makes possible, and they point to, new ways of doing things. And, be creative, be different. Most importantly, provide deep, deep value, because if your assets only repeat what everyone else is saying in the market, they're going to be useless, right? Well, the strongest marketing assets carry original insight, the kind that makes a hospital executive stop and think and actually act. So how do you actually move from, a collection of materials to a coordinated system? And I think this is really practical and so important. First, you audit what you have, right? Map your current assets against the framework. Second, you prioritize by buyer journey, match assets to awareness, consideration, and decision stages. Third, you develop a roadmap, build, quarter by quarter goals. Fourth, you repurpose smartly, right? Like one case study can become a video, a webinar, and a newsletter. And fifth, you measure impact, track which assets actually, move opportunities forward. And this isn't about producing everything at once. It's about, intentional sequencing, build the foundation, amplify, then master. So let me leave you with this, because, after decades of selling into hospitals as a sales rep, as a founder and CEO, and now as an advisor, I can say this with real conviction. Your marketing asset strategy is the foundation of selling into hospitals. Without it, your sales team is left to fight uphill battles. With it, they become trusted advisors who, close deals faster and more effectively. And the 7-8-9 marketing asset framework isn't theory, right? It's a real playbook of what actually works in healthcare sales. So ask yourself, do we have the 7 basics locked in? Are we building toward the 8 advanced? Are we positioning for the 9 mastery? I think the companies that answer yes to those questions, they won't just close more deals, right? They're going to shape the future of healthcare. So if you're ready to build a marketing asset strategy that works in the hospital market, there's a link in the show notes to schedule a strategy call with me. I also have some free resources and a paid program that are linked in the show notes as well. So I really encourage you to check those out. That's it for this episode of Selling to Healthcare. I'm Lisa Miller, and I'll be back next week with more strategies to help you sell smarter and stand out. Until next time.